So hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. We are gathering today to discuss about technology and the startup ecosystem post-COVID-19. My name is Tamar Katamadze and I'm an associate at Fridman Law Firm. I will be moderating the webinar and I would like to introduce our firm's managing partner and the guest speakers who are experts in the technology and finance sectors. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I see a few people trickling in. This is our first panel discussion that we've had since we founded the firm last August. So we're still under a year old. We work with many high-tech startups in a variety of spaces, including esports and AR, VR, and also more typical e-com startups and everything in between. I wanted to thank the panelists, and I want to turn it over to you, Tamar, because I know we want to keep this within a reasonable amount of time for everyone to have a chance to discuss what they're presenting. Ash, do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Sure. Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ash. I am the VP and head of finance of a fintech company in Silicon Valley called Cunexus. We raised the Series A back in 2016, and since then we've originated about $8 billion and growing in loans. I'm also a mentor at 500 Startups, a leading early stage or seed stage VC firm. Previously in my career, I was a private equity investor at Standard Chartered Private Equity in Singapore. We were making $20 to $150 million investments throughout Southeast Asia. I also worked as a venture capitalist at a Singapore government-linked venture capital firm, both in Singapore and San Francisco. I've also been a co-founder of a couple of startups, most recently at a fintech startup where we were providing loans. That's me in a nutshell.
Great. Oliver?
Hi, how are you? I was just looking over the questions. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I'm Oliver Mitchell. I'm a venture partner at FFVC. We are a venture firm in New York City. We have about $200+ million under management. We have 90 portfolio companies. I spend most of my time focused on business and industrial automation, robotics, remote sensing and drones, machine learning technologies. I also write a lot of syndicated articles and host events when we can get together physically, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Great. And Irina, please.
Hi, my name is Irina Lanin. I'm a venture partner with VU Venture Partners. We are really a vertical agnostic fund. However, my focus is healthcare, and I'm looking and leading healthcare investments with VU. Prior to joining the VC world, I worked in medical devices and in pharma. At Sanofi and Merck, and changed then to VC world to basically follow my passion for some startups and accelerating new innovative ideas.
Thank you for your introduction, impressive backgrounds. So after finishing the panel discussion, a recorded version will be available online on our firm's webpage. And also we would love to hear from you. Please send us questions, and there will be time for your questions at the end of the panel discussion. And for those of you just joining us, welcome. I would like to give a brief overview about the topic before Oliver starts his presentation. But first, we should point out that Fridman Law Firm and the whole team stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black community as a whole. We are against racism, and we have taken a look at what we could do to help the cause. Last week, we pledged to match donations to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Bail Project up to 1,000. And in just over 24 hours, we met our goal and donated 2,000 among these two great organizations. We have also instituted a pro bono platform for Black-owned entrepreneurs, and we are now representing our first company under this program. So if you have any questions and more our information, please contact us on our website or social media. And about the topic, just give you a brief overview. As we see, the novel coronavirus crisis is having and will continue to have a material impact on the US and global economies. And on a massive scale and in a very short period of time, hundreds of thousands of businesses have shuttered or cut back their operations significantly. Millions of workers have been laid off or furloughed, and consumer spending has been drastically reduced. Supply and demand chains have been disrupted. And on the other hand, the situation is different for startups in some sectors. They are witnessing a sharp increase in business. For instance, video conferencing firms are adding hordes of users as companies conduct meetings online. Also, gaming, streaming, and online education content providers are all reporting a significant increase in users and time spent on their platforms. Also, it was recently predicted that the pandemic will result in the strengthening of big tech, and big tech and digital companies are net beneficiaries of new habits and behaviors resulting from our efforts to contain the coronavirus. For comparison, during the 2008 financial crisis, the combined value of the 5 biggest companies such as ExxonMobil, General Electric, Microsoft, AT&T, and Procter & Gamble was 1.6 trillion. And today, Microsoft alone has a similar market capitalization. Notwithstanding the FAA-NG group of companies, since the pandemic's grinding economies and some companies to a halt, companies such as Peloton has seen downloads increase 5-fold in a month. And Zoom has grown to 200 million users from 10 million in December, and also Instacart users grew 6 times in that period. But it's interesting, what will these beneficiary companies look like post-COVID, or what will legacy companies look like? Who wins, or on a personal level, what do things look like? Are robotics and devices that encourage contactless operation or voice control going to be leaders in our homes, businesses, hotels, and make up the next wave of leading tech companies? For instance, the international alarm about the COVID-19 pandemic was sounded first not by a human, but by a computer. As the pandemic continues to spread around the globe, AI researchers are teaming with the tech companies to build an automated tracking system that will mine vast amount of data from social media and traditional news for signs of new outbreaks. To address those concerns and questions, our guest speakers will give us their thoughts and ideas. Oliver, if you are ready, we would love to hear what you think about it.
Wow, it's really going to be very tough to follow you. You had amazing stats there and a great presentation. What I would like to do is walk you through a presentation that I started giving at CES, maybe the last CES, Consumer Electronics Show, in person for quite some time, even though they promised next year to host 1 million people in Las Vegas. And walk you through how I see robotics and artificial intelligence, changing and really changing the landscape of how people can reopen. When I gave the talk at CES, it was about the acceleration of the adoption of robotics within retail and within property tech, whether that's logistics or in facility management. And looking at a post-COVID world, it really comes down to really 3 principles: remote workplaces, smaller crews, and healthier communities. So with that, I'm going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes to whip through this quickly. There's lots of things to discuss, but in the interest of time, if you have any questions directly on this presentation that we don't answer in the panel, feel free to email me at the end. So, There we go. So who am I? As mentioned, I'm a partner at FFVC. I'm also a mentor at Endless Frontier Labs at NYU Stern. I write a lot of syndicated articles. If you want, you can follow my Twitter handle there. And when we do have events, you can go to meetup.com/RoboLab. That's my plug, and let's go. So the innovation timeline is a really great place to start. And really, when you think about global catalyst for change, I go back to World War II. And that really, that during the war effort in fighting the Nazis and the Japanese, an immense amount of resources for the first time was invested between the private sector and government, and including academia. And you know, we all know about Alan Turing in breaking the Nazi codes and the Manhattan Project. But when the war came to a close, starting with Roosevelt and then Truman, he turned to Enver Bush, who was really in charge of the scientific effort, and said, what do you see us moving forward in this partnership? I believe if everybody could mute, that would be a lot better. So he turned to Enver Bush, and Bush, came up with a paper called Endless Frontier. And NYU Stern's labs are named after. And Endless Frontier brought together a partnership between government, academia, and the private sector, which led to a number or many of the advancements that we take advantage of, like the microprocessor, like robotics, like end effectors, leading up to a period in my lifetime where it reached a crescendo was in 1997 when Deep Blue beat the chess master at that time, Garry Kasparov, in a publicly televised chess match. And everyone thought at that time period in the late 1990s that we were going to have an AI capable of human-like intelligence. Well, as you can see in the innovation timeline, there was a trough of disillusionment. And then when we see with the introduction of the mobile technologies, that we see the curve going upwards for robotics, artificial intelligence, and sensors. And really, in conclusion about the timeline is that we're reaching another period of time where we see a global catalyst for change. And really, what we're living through, there's going to be relative to COVID, is that there's a pre and post-COVID moment. And what are we going to do, and what are we going to harness from this moment? The world is going to be drastically different post-COVID, and how are we going to harness these technologies going forward to make reopening possible and to protect us from the next pandemic or epidemic? Really, the tech drivers, in the mobile revolution that led to mechatronics in that high growth area are the same as today, is that the immense amount of data that we're collecting via our mobile devices, via sensors embedded into lampposts and into office buildings and into the Internet of Things, create that data that tracks pedestrian and vehicular traffic, tracks every movement within a retail store. And that data is available via the cloud to anyone, anywhere, where they can utilize that data to provide meaningful transactions. And then when you plug in the data and the cloud computing and the declining cost of sensors, you see that this is an amazing soup that makes robotics finally affordable on a mass level, beyond just big industrial robots building cars in Detroit, really enabling a society where machines and humans can work side by side, augmenting one another. So pre-COVID, relative to prop tech, and I'm going to focus on prop tech because that's about reopening in particular, you saw an immense amount of investments in that space. You saw that most of it was about workflow, and it doesn't have to be about prop tech, but I'm focusing on prop tech as an example here. And you see like workflow, construction workflow like Kintera, or leasing marketing workflow like Compass. And a lot of this was backed by SoftBank that led to a subset of the technology industry growing very quickly. And in fact, prop tech reached $16 billion. A lot of that was backed by SoftBank, about half of that. And everyone thought that 2020 2020 was going to double that, and really what we hit was this dead end with the pandemic. And really the life before, we know what it looked like. It was crowded restaurants, co-working spaces. And now when we go forward, and what does reopening look like? Well, clearly, how we entertain and dine publicly is going to be very different, and how we work is going to be very different. And really, it's not a dead end. I would think of it as a cul-de-sac, and really we're going to have to go forward in a very different way than we did in the past. So one of the areas that is the remote operations. For example, in facility management, you were talking about, remote operations using sensors, controlling complex machines. And this doesn't have to be just in a building. It could be in manufacturing. It could be in complex facilities and organizations. And then you're gonna see, janitorial services and other, low-paying jobs that were very much so, a contact, interface of a worker interfacing with a workplace can be automated. On the left, you see SoftBank's robotic vacuum cleaner for big industrial spaces called Wiz. And on the right, you see A&K Robotics. There's also Brain OS, and even cleaning bathrooms. And so, this can also go into taking over dull, dirty jobs like facade and window washing. And so that goes into smaller crews. Rather than going out with, 5 or 10 people on a site, you can have 1 or 2 people in an iPad and machines, and really provide a experience that can execute on social distancing and really maintain high level of performance. When you think about, biohazards, and you think about waste, and for humans to interface with that. And at the same time, if you're going to be automating it, why don't you make it profitable as well by better sorting technologies, using image processors and using end effectors for making it, for doing recycling. And then when you think about smaller crews, an example with construction, they couldn't hire enough highly skilled workers. There was a lot of succession problems with older tradesmen and their younger apprentice or family members not going into the field. And you see, for my own example, for my own portfolio, Exobionics was augmenting tradesmen, making them be able to do 5 to 10 times the amount of the output by actually having wearable robots. And then you could see robots actually building 60% of the facilities off-site. And so this is a company called Fast Brick that lays out interlocking bricks, and then you would have a human mason that would put the cement there. And there's other companies like Blueprint Robotics that does prefab housing. In Baltimore, you upload to AutoCAD the plans, and Marriott will ship the walls, the floors, and the ceilings in the same containers that they ship TV sets and mattresses. And so there you would have someone be able to put it together, in a very interlocking way, and you would hire tradesmen for the conduit and the pump and the plumbing. This is an example of a company up in Boston and Cambridge that has mobile robot sprayers. They're also doing sanitizing as well through the sprayers. And so rather than a paint crew going out with 5 or 10 people and doing a commercial office or a big industrial space, you can once again have that person go out with an iPad. You put out the floor plan, and the robot sprayers will automatically do that. Where having the human oversee it, it has a more consistent and faster output. And a company from our own portfolio, CivDrone, that does autonomous surveying pre-COVID. And now they have a fleet of robots, both terrestrial and robot and aerial, that for both horizontal and vertical construction sites, laying out survey points that connect. They're really IoT stakes that connect online. And so as the plans change, the survey points, information change. And in fact, they are so highly skilled that they were chosen by the Israeli Innovation Authority to build, sanitizing robots to sterilize airports and office buildings in Israel. And so they have a whole separate line of products that does those sprayers, robot sprayers out there. And so what does the age of social distancing look like? Well, I think Amazon Go previously gave us a peek into that, a cashierless experience, an associateless experience, using robots to do stock. And so that's only going to grow within hospitality. Here you have a company backed by SoftBank again on the left, Bear Robotics, that does autonomous busing and waiter services. So you can order on your iPad, and rather than a human delivering the meals to the table, a robot will. You have kiosk services and Savio doing, room service in hotels, and this is only going to grow. So what could this be the future of concierge? I think it comes in all shapes and sizes. You have Sophia, which is the first robot to receive citizenship in Saudi Arabia, of all places. But you have lots of different mobile kiosk robots on the left. And then here you have Chromobot that is doing a check-in. And so it depends on the brand experience. This doesn't have to be for hotels or restaurants. This is for airports. This is for front desk of office spaces, for building receptions, for any time period where you needed to check that person needed quick information. A robot can provide that contactless experience, keeping people safe at a distance. And so ultimately, before we were talking a lot about smart cities, when talking about autonomous vehicles and logistics and city planning, I think today we're talking about healthier communities. I think in the same way that, people will want, that whether to know that restaurant is safe in Manhattan, do they have an A, B, or C grade? You're going to want to know that data to a mobile app. How often is that space clean? What do they do to sterilize it? What is the air quality? Have they had a COVID person and in the space? And this gets into privacy issues as well. But just to touch on, which I imagine Irina is going to speak a lot about, is telehealth and telepresence. Clearly it has had a moment. It was active before, but it's accelerating at a great pace. And then on the right, with hospital and senior facilities, this is another example of sterilization using UV3 rays, which are not safe for humans. But this robot, mobile robot, autonomously will go in, zap a hospital room, zap a hotel room, zap an office without a human being there, and to kill all microbes on site. And likewise, when you think about how much we've relied on Instacart and Uber Eats, no touch deliveries is a real thing. It's only growing. It's growing in all shapes and sizes, whether mobile robots or golf carts or minivans. Here's an example of a company in Ann Arbor, Michigan, actually using a tricycle base, and so it can go in actually bike lanes with a 100-pound cab there. And then that gets into its autonomous shipping and logistics. One example from the FF portfolio, Mana, which was doing autonomous drone deliveries for food and beverage, and similar to Uber Eats in the sky, and quickly pivoted into pharmaceutical deliveries in Ireland, had all their regulation approvals accelerated, and they're doing pharmaceutical deliveries today across the UK. And this gets into a wider discussion about autonomous logistics and shipping, not just on the land and air, but also on the sea. And so, one interesting data point from this COVID moment is that pre-COVID, we saw that car ownership declining. During COVID, we see that car ownership accelerating, and that people do not want to be beholden to other people, and they want the freedom and liberty that comes with owning a car. And so while we have seen a stoppage and ample parking in Manhattan, auto valet is a real thing, and especially with increased car ownership. And this is something that every tier one, every OEM is working on when you think about management. And when you think about it, this opens the door to what does the future of mass transit look like with autonomous shuttles? What is the future ride sharing relative to the pandemic? And even aerial shuttles around the city, which I look forward to discussing at greater length. So clearly, post-COVID, we had lots of different stakeholders, and it was about, controlling the information, making sure that all the parties were on one page, and the workflow and the data was distributed via the cloud. Post-COVID, we're utilizing machines and artificial intelligence to limit the number of people within a job site, to be efficiently managed remotely, and to build healthier cities and workplaces and report on that data in real time. And so that is what I had to say. Happy, here's my email if you have specific questions on the presentation. If we do not answer it via the panel, but I look forward to a healthy discussion. Thank you so much, Tamar and Neil.
Thank you so much for your impressive presentation. So it's very critical issues today, and I had some questions related to AI technologies. How is AI technology going to gain market share?
Yeah, I think that, AI, first off, I think that question is very broad. And so if I can unpack it a little bit, that artificial intelligence is a tool in a toolbox, just like my ratchet wrench. And that I just got done building for my family a mobile basketball, so excuse the analogy. It's taken 2 days, but my ratchet wrench has multiple of sizes and shapes, and different parts need different sizes and shapes and different torque. And so I think that, relative to AI, it depends on the use case. And clearly, like, for example, when you're thinking about, say, financial services, and you're thinking about the workflow, the immense amount of data that you're crunching, that artificial intelligence can definitely crunch the data better and perform at a higher level than, human computers, if you would. And so, but you have to think about how you're going to manipulate that data, and what is the good data, and how you're architecting that tree to get the best outcome. Relative to healthier communities, clearly, if you take, for example, the race to develop a vaccine, you have an immense amount of information points, of data points, of different behavior patterns, of different communities, of people where COVID has affected. And you even have asymptomatic people. And so this data, in order to efficiently do it, even on a binary computer, it takes a lot of time. And so clearly building a neural network that has the library pre-populated with the essential labels that you want to extrapolate from all this manner of data can help the scientists better, fine-tune a vaccine, fine-tune a therapy. And really to take that one step further, as I mentioned, a binary computer is still slow, even with artificial intelligence. Really where that gets exciting is about 5 to 10 years from now, when you add quantum computing to the mix, when you can actually use linear algebra to accelerate the data processing. So I don't know if that answers your question. How will SaaS companies better sell their AI? Well, I think you got to find the problem in the marketplace, and really, like, for example, right now reopening, you can reopen, but you can reopen a restaurant, but will patrons come after you've made all these investments in plastic dividers and PPE and better sanitizing? Well, if you can report using AI on the air quality, on the patron flow point, and you can connect it with COVID infection rates, then people will have confidence. And so really AI is a tool to build trust with your user base. And so the best, most successful selling of that, which Ash, I'm sure, can elaborate on, is building trust and showing how best it can really solve a problem that is really open out there, that is not being solved or being solved inefficiently.
Thank you very much.
Oliver, I did actually have a question for you. As you look at AI-enabled robots, I'm sure you get pitched on many different startups that are trying to develop AI-enabled robots. Are there any common technological constraints that you see that are preventing progress? As an example, about 7 or 8 years ago, I evaluated a company that was trying to build two AI-enabled robotic arms that could then cook any meal using those robotic arms. And over time, they found it was difficult to develop those robotic arms with sufficient dexterity in an economical way. And then I also read recently, or a couple years ago, that Tesla had scaled back some automation in their factories because they found that the robotic arms that were supposed to be automating some aspects of their construction it was difficult to develop robotic arms that had sufficient dexterity and intelligence. And to do it in an economical way where it made sense to sort of replace human workers. So the question is, do you see any common technological constraints that are preventing progress in relation to AI-enabled robots? Yeah.
I think the constraints and what I've tried to do is pull the curtain back a little bit on the hype. Is that the idea of a general AI or a robot that can solve everything, is a common problem. And when going to market, you find that it just will not work that way. In the example of using robotic arms to cook, well, clearly, to pick up a baking pan and to pour in a batter, in those two motions, and the batter, that could be done. But to slice up and dice an onion and to get spices of saffron, into the mix, and then to be able to, on top of that, grade that bread, and clearly what you're dealing with there is just a huge undertaking where it's not just about the dexterity, it's about the tactile sensing, it's about the vision, it's about the knowledge and the weighting. And so really, when deploying robots for the sake of technology and not for solving a real problem, like for example, if you were going to build a smaller fast food restaurant, you might say, we want a fry cooking robot. Now we know we can output, very simply, the meat. Just squeeze it out and put it on the grill, and then we'll just have a robotic arm flipping robots and then putting them on a conveyor with preloaded buns. That is very specific, but that robot can't make salad. It can do the bun flipping. It could do the burger flipping and putting them on the buns. And so, I think, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, that robot system now costs $500,000. But before, I had my employee who did not only the burger flipping and putting them on the buns, but he also did the salad and the squeezing of the special sauce and the pickle chopping and the French fry cooking. And he was a lot more. He was a lot less than that. And you know what? He also interfaced with customers and cleaned up the store afterwards. So maybe the fry cooking robot, while sounding great, might be some eye candy, when you put it in the store, but it's not going to have the longevity and the ROI that my employee did it before. So it really has to make sense for the business. That's what I'm saying. And so, technologically, yes, it's hard. I would say that technologically, people try to go out with a much bigger, a much bigger outlook and not solving specific problems that are from the marketplace, and really making that shift from the lab to the commercial marketplace is the most important shift, and really solving immediate things, whether it's, tightening bolts, at a higher torque than a human and at a faster torque than a human, which could produce a greater output, and thinking through that ROI specifically. I'm an East Coast investor, and I think through what is that return on that investment first and foremost, not the pretty robotic arm. So it's not as technological as it is business specific. I could speak to you about cabling. I could speak to you about, about end effectors and torque and all that stuff. But all that is solvable. I think that if you don't have the business solved, it's going to be a lot harder for the startup.
Thank you, Oliver, for your thoughts and ideas about AI technology. It's very impressive and interesting. I have a question for Irina. So could you please give us your opinion how COVID-19 changes healthcare and health tech landscape? Or can we say that it's a new era for healthcare industry, or is COVID a game changer for them?
Yeah, a game changer. I'm not sure if I would really say it's a complete game changer, but it definitely was a huge accelerator for the entire telehealth. We all have experienced that we basically in our work life, we switched from the office to the Zoom. And it was basically similar, I think, on the healthcare side. So we switched from office visits to actually televisits. And that was really, I think, for many blessings, so that you can actually still connect to a doctor and speak to them. And but you don't have like to expose yourself to kind of a danger situation there. However, I think this situation also exposed a couple of things where telehealth is not able yet to address this acute care as efficiently. So you can speak to a doctor on a video. However, to properly assess a patient, many times they actually need to do an exam. Or they need to do some blood work. And nowadays we still need to get into the doctor's office to conduct those the exams. But there are a lot of companies now out there who are basically working on closing that gap and stepping into the area of telediagnostics, so that you really can conduct some basic exams like, for example, hearing the function of your heart or the function of your lung through a stethoscope. You actually can have a device at home that basically transmits those sounds to a physician's office. And during a telehealth visit, a doctor can basically not only look at you, but also do those simple exams. An example is here the company Title Care. So they offer a device with some add-ons, and those add-ons can basically be used to conduct several exams, like for example, of the ear, for the ear infection. And then basically the video of the ear is transmitted to the physician, and they can have a look and evaluate the condition of the ear and if there is any inflammation. Same also with the sore throat. You can basically see what's going on in patient mouth. And then, of course, just what I mentioned as well, a stethoscope exam that can be conducted by the patient just putting this device on their chest, and the sounds are transmitted here. So that's one part of closing this gap. There are as well a lot of companies who are working to get the blood work done more conveniently. So there is, for example, a company, Inamed. They are working on a solution to really to simplify the monitoring of certain conditions, like for example congestive heart failure. So they can remotely monitor the vitals, but that's I think not as innovative. But they provide as well a cartridge that a patient can put on their arm, and that cartridge basically can get some blood from their arms through microneedles, and that is an amount that is actually sufficient to already perform a couple of tests. Another company, Get Labs, is focusing on really that nurses and technicians are coming out to a patient's home and simply draw the blood in at home and getting those cartridges to a lab, and by that eliminating the need of the patient going to an office, and can do that basically in a safer way, in a convenient way. So that, I think, is really interesting to observe, that basically there was, I think, yes, a shift in the understanding that we also need this part of the telediagnostic as well, which will and definitely complement the entire telehealth area.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Otherwise, I move to Ash, because he practiced in fintech, and could you please share with us your experience, Ash, how fintech industry changed since the pandemic announced, and does it have a significant impact on the industry?
Yeah, sure. So the nature of the impact really depends on the product or solution. Some have benefited while others have been hurt. My company, for example, sales have accelerated really significantly, and that's because COVID has, in a significant way, accelerated the push for digitalization and an associated push away from transactions that require in-person handling. So our product, we sell software to banks and credit unions that help them, digitalize. So that's why sales have accelerated very quickly. On the other hand, one of the companies that I'm mentoring at 500 Startups, they are offering credit cards to subprime customers overseas in another country. And they have seen that new credit card activations have just outright plummeted since COVID. And they were in due diligence with many different VCs for a Series A, all of whom put the process on pause. So now, instead of a Series A financing, they've now pivoted to raising a convertible or safe note with a significant discount. So that's another example, and another example I'd provide, also associated with a company also overseas in the P2P payment space, but they're in hyper growth mode. And they had just raised, they're just about to raise or finalize their Series A. But what was really interesting in relation to that company was that after the terms were agreed with investors for the Series A, and we were in the closing process, they found that there was so much interest from many different fintech investors that they actually went back and raised the valuation right at the last minute. So I haven't seen that happen, very often. So I think it really depends on what subsector within fintech that you're in, what subsector and also what business you're in within fintech, and how that business has been impacted by COVID. So I'm seeing, outcomes that are very varied.
And what do you think? What are the successful asset classes post-COVID? What markets will win? What market will win within
fintech, or
overall?
Overall, maybe.
Yes.
I see. Oliver, do you want to take that question? You might be better placed to answer that question.
Sure. Do you mind just repeating the question? I'm trying to see how.
I asked that what are the successful asset classes post-COVID and what markets will win?
Sure. I think that
technology sector.
Right. I think that the areas that. So let me back up. So going back to my principles, that remote work, work environments, smaller crews, and healthier communities. So technology companies that facilitate those will be very successful. So clearly, Zoom has had a huge moment, from these technologies. But so has telepresence company and robotics company like Blue Ocean Robotics. So Blue Ocean Robotics owns Beam. They bought Beam, which is an American company based in Utah, for I think like $130 million 18 months ago. And Beam makes a lot of sense. If you're familiar with Beam, it's a mobile robot with a screen that I can be working in customer service in a physical sales call with a robot interfacing with my customer, and I could be staying in New York, my customer's in Utah, and I don't have to get on a plane to go to Utah to have that discussion. They also make mobile, sterilizing and sanitizing robots. They make that UV3 robot that I showed there, the blue light robot. So clearly companies that are, facilitating this in the short run that can help reopen and accelerate it, reopen and build that trust, will be successful. I think, within the workflow, if areas where you don't have to go into a physical premise, right? Like mobile technologies that provide, simple banking transactions, to complex, sophisticated, transactions in real estate or in securities that can be done remotely, or even, in customer service, utilizing chatbots. On this call is an amazing Israeli startup led by Seth Greenfield in person that has been working with Toyota and others and really helping them on the customer service side, that recognizing that in this COVID moment, you can't have everybody in a call center. And so these chatbots can better triage people to take calls at home. And so I think, companies that are facilitating this change, whether in and growing with the opening of new sectors. Before COVID, the fastest area of robotics was in logistics because of our insatiable appetite for e-commerce, right? So they wanted to be able to deliver something the next day, and so they used robots in the warehouse to be able to facilitate that. And that gets into a much wider discussion. And so, not just Amazon and Walmart, but there are specialty robots like Fabric, which is an Israeli company that's raised, over $100 million, and they do micro fulfillment centers using robots, and they're also in grocery. But post this, how are we going to be able to provide contactless delivery? How are we be able to give people that trust, that they can trust us, that we will provide a healthier experience, that they will want to keep on coming back to us? So clearly the idea of walking into Bloomingdale's with, hundreds of people and on the aisle is not a good prospect to buy that shirt or that blouse or that sweater. So
thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. And while we are a bit tight on time, I have last question for you. How tech companies are preparing for reopening? Do they have any response plan? Maybe that defines roles and responsibilities among members of the board of directors, senior managers, and outside advisors?
Well, I think, the challenge in the U.S. is the current government has a very sort of laissez-faire approach to managing a pandemic and other things. But I'm not speaking about politics. Politics aside, is that the administration has pushed everything to the states, and so every state is different of what they require. If you go down to Florida, requires very little. If you're in New York State, the bar is much higher. I think where the challenge is for businesses is what happens if there's a recurrence, which is looking like in 12 states that reopened earlier, they've seen a spike in COVID cases. So what happens in the recurrence? And what are we doing regarding contact tracing? And how are these businesses able to report the data of their patrons and their customers coming in there who possibly had COVID, who exhibited symptoms, who knew so-and-so and so forth? Let me give you an example. So, Tamar, I assume you're Israeli. And so in Israel, Israel has taken a very hardline approach to managing
I'm from
COVID.
Tbilisi, Georgia, not from Israeli.
Okay.
But I know because of my name.
But
you got confused.
So Tamar,
Yes,
right.
it's cute.
So Okay, nachon. So Seth is Israeli on the and so I'm going to pick on Seth, but Israel has taken a very hard approach where they've actually gone to their internal security forces, the Shabak, which is the equivalent of the FBI, to mandate that everyone download a app and that tracks their whereabouts and that tracks their testing, and that if they do have COVID, that they're tracked, that they're quarantined. In fact, they'll put people up at hotels, and they'll alert people in the neighborhood who potentially who know so and so. Now that is a very hardline approach, raises lots of privacy and civil liberty questions, but between very little and this sort of laissez-faire approach and this very hardline approach, there might be a middle ground. I mean, how many people on this call have been approached voluntarily to download an app to track COVID? I'm just curious. I've not. I get text messages from the mayor telling me it's warm outside, be careful. But why isn't there an app telling me to download, voluntarily to track my whereabouts, to provide location data, and they'll provide me data about, the infections in my area. I don't know if other states have that, but clearly my point is, when you're talking about reopening, you could buy the robot, you could buy all the gear, you could do all this, but if there is a influx and a reawakening of the pandemic, I don't know if reawakening is the right word, but a recurrence of the pandemic at very large levels, people's confidence and trust will just fall to the floor. And there's a point where government has to partner with the private sector and in facilitating this data transfer.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Ash and Irina?
Yeah, sure. This is actually something I'm a little bit excited about. I think many software companies are discovering in relation to reopening, right, that there is no discernible decrease in productivity through remote work. My company, for example, we always allowed remote work, but preferred people were in the office, as there was an assumption that teams could work together better in person. But in the preceding months, at least in my company, we've seen that that's not really the case. So I think many startups will become, I guess, remote preferred, or certainly allow remote work. And I think there's going to be an overall decrease in demand for office space. And what I'm excited about is I think there are going to be more opportunities for employment outside of traditional tech hubs like Silicon Valley. And many people will be able to move to cheaper parts of the country, or maybe you can have a job in San Francisco and move to Argentina and just enjoy your lifestyle there. So I'm personally excited about the prospect of moving to Argentina. I don't know about
struggling with these visa issues in this country.
Right.
I can only echo that. I was able to completely work online over the last 2-3 months, and it worked very well. And even I would say, like, in some instances it was actually an advantage. So I'm constantly looking at startups, and I like to attend some demo days of accelerators. I would attend them here in New York, but now actually I have the possibility to attend actually the demo days in San Francisco and in London and in Berlin. So in some ways, it gave me a greater exposure to the startup ecosystem by having a lot of things being online. So there are as well, I think, the advantages there. Maybe the future looks like that you can attend live, but you will have an option of online, so that you have this greater reach.
Thank you very much.
Reach and convenience, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes.
Tamar, I just wanted to, as I said before, I think it boils down to the 3 principles of, remote workplaces that Irina and Ash spoke about, and that goes to, open source telepresence and other aspects of remote operations to facilitating smaller teams of people working together in a physical space. There's only so much you can do with your children, getting educated in the next room, and eventually you do have to meet. You do actually have to physically be in an environment, not just for knowledge workers, but there's lots of other jobs, that require on-site operations, and then, facilitating help. And I think that, as I said before, the missing piece on the facilitating help is what role in reopening will government play, even in a more proactive role in shutting down government and just facilitating safer experiences.
Thank you very much. We have one question from audience. I will read this. Until I know, AI solutions based in hardware and software are expensive for third world countries or small startups. From the point of view of software development startup, are there cheap solutions? I'm thinking in something like get AI products from China and sell them by Amazon, or something like that. But if I think cheaper, I will probably just sell drones. Can you give me some lights about this? Thanks for the question.
You get what you pay for, So.
I maybe can give actually an example here from the healthcare space. So I recently came across this company, Butterfly Network, which actually provides a more cost-effective solution of an ultrasound. So it's basically it's an ultrasound head that you actually can plug in just into your mobile phone, and by that have the ultrasound images on your phone. You basically need to install the software on your mobile phone. And that allows, even in remote areas, to conduct those the ultrasound exam. So by building all this AI, all this technology, it will actually give access to a lot of communities that maybe didn't have access to a proper huge ultrasound device, whereas this device is cost effective and small, and can be easily sent to remote areas and as well to third world countries. So AI and technology, I think, doesn't have to be only more costly. They can be as well cost effective.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your.
I think, going back to what I said earlier, it depends on what is the use case. If you're a, say, bed and breakfast, do you need a big robot doing check-in, or could you use an iPad? If you're not going to have someone physically there. If you're, providing that ultrasound, or if you're an obstetrician, probably you're going to have, a much more sophisticated, equipment. And so I think it depends on the use case. If you're in physical therapy, you can buy at CVS, electrical stimulation, but it's different than what you would get at the physical therapist. And there's the knowledge behind it. And so, yeah, you could use drones to spray and sanitize and provide image sensing, but at a certain point, it depends on the use case of when you want to upscale that technology to come up with a better output.
So our discussion comes to an end, and I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. And I would like to thank Oliver, Irina, and Ash for your invaluable contribution. I'm personally thrilled about getting you together and hearing your precious thoughts and ideas about the topic. And thanks to the audience for attending the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to share thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.